we got started, the Irish Housing Network got started we got started working together last year, and there was immediate really bad crisis, particularly around homelessness last May, so May 2015. Do you remember what were the cases that we were seeing coming up, or what was it that we were?
Basically, I remember was getting a phone call and we had a girl that couldn't access emergency accommodation. She was very young, she was only about 20. She was 6 months pregnant and she had a 2-year-old and she couldn't access emergency accommodation. And we had tried to access a bed for her for the night and she was just being refused because she was from a different county.
Yeah.
So that was the first kind of severe case where a child was involved in actually sleeping on the streets that night. Then we also came across the mental health patient who had been in HSE care for 22 years,
yeah,
and basically handed a piece of paper and told access homeless accommodation, and kicked out onto the street. So he was basically on the streets, not knowing what services to link in with, how to maintain the hostel accommodation he was given because of his mental health. So
there was no support at all?
No support whatsoever for him. We'd also came across a case where a couple were private renting and they were paying cash. They hadn't got any subsidies or relief to help them pay the rent, and the landlord was moving back in. They had one child, he worked and she was a home mother, and basically because he earned too much money he had to give up his job to access emergency accommodation. They weren't able to access it either. They were given the option of self-accommodate, and this is where we really start understanding the self-accommodate system that was within the home services. How do you think, or what do you think?
Yeah, what's the cause? What led up to this situation where you would have a young family with a child on the street with a sleeping bag? What was the pieces that were leading up to that, or what was building up to that in 2015 when the homeless crisis really kicked off and really emerged?
What we were finding, I suppose you can look at it and say that it was down to supply and demand. The demand was growing and the supply wasn't there, especially around social housing, because they had stopped building and they had stopped giving out houses to those in need. We also, if you look at the private market for the rental sector, rents were being increased. Landlords were small landlords that were in mortgage difficulty, homes were being repossessed. You had bad conditions where families were living in houses that were unstable. There was mould in the houses, and there was defects that they couldn't maintain or fix. Among the private market, more people were being pushed into the private market from mortgages,
yeah,
and students, and basically because they weren't building social housing, and the supplementary payments were there through RAS and rent supplements.
Yeah. And do you think the fact that there was a massive economic crisis in 2008, that was one of the things that drove that change or started to frame and put pressure?
I think it did have a big framework around it. What do you think happened there with the economic?
I suppose it might go even further back than that. If you think that private property was the foundation of the Irish state, that defending private property and ownership was very important, and the only time that had been challenged or changed was when communities themselves had organised around the same conditions we're talking about now, about mould, damp, unsecure tenancies, landlords and rent being too high, and just no security for homes for a large number of people. So it seems like all of that led up to a massive banking expansion and massive expansion of mortgages in the 1990s and 2000s, which came crashing down in 2008.
I think we need to look at as well, when it was good.
Yeah.
When it was good, everybody was kind of being offered mortgages, and it didn't matter what kind of eligibility you had for it. It was broadened. Everybody had access to it. They were given the promise of home ownership more so by being able to get these massive loans without knowing what the repercussions actually were going to be, or understanding what was going to happen down the long term if a banking crisis had happened.
Yeah. So they were sold a pox that if originally the aim was to have ownership for a small number of people, in the 1990s they were trying to expand that because there was a lot more money that banks could lend out, a lot more profit that banks could make. And then that would spur on building, so developers would be making more money, and that would spur on investors, so they'd be making more money. And at the end of the day, there was a large number of people who were not only offered a home, which would be more secure, which is understandable to take, but also the chance of progression in society. They're seen as this is their way forward.
Yeah.
So they're sold a message and directly the home, a material that they could have that could possibly provide security, even if there was no prospect of what a rainy day would be like, or what if that whole system was overextending itself or was really spiraling out of control. It wasn't even factoring in.
And then you can look at as well, because if you were a renter and if you hadn't got a job for as long, or you couldn't access a mortgage, that's where the regeneration estates came to play, really, wasn't it? That you were able to access private renting because it, for example, be Ballymun.
Yeah.
That was a social housing estate community, and then when the regeneration came in, it really brought in the private renters. And what one of the clauses that they had in Ballymun was, if you were from Ballymun, you couldn't rent in Ballymun and get welfare supplement. So it was a kind of a cleansing of the social housing estates as well.
Yeah. So if you're building mortgages as a way for people to own homes, at the other end they still had to break up the alternative, which was social housing. And that obviously they played on or used the stigma that associated out of the 80s and the economic crisis, and then the heroin epidemic and everything that hit large parts of Dublin and other parts of the country, and to use that to essentially break up in some ways communities have been quite strong that have fought for social housing in the 70s and led many of the fightbacks in loads of other areas through like the Dublin Housing Action Committee among others.
So they also used the social stigma of the drugs, of young mothers having children, lone parents, the loss of jobs in the area, the cuts, to kind of push the idea that we're helping the community. But we didn't actually see that, because what did we see? We see many families actually more affected, being pushed out of their own community, not being able to link in and stay with the roots that they know.
Yeah. Being broken up, sent to the edge of the city without your support network. And if investors and developers and banks were making loads of money through mortgages, they were also being able to make money through regeneration, because most of them were public-private partnerships. So they were still able to make a killing from less social housing being provided, more private developments around it, and all the building being done by private developers.
And actually, when you look back at it as well, in the PPP system, didn't they used to claim the 10% for social housing?
Yeah.
So 10% compared to 90% wouldn't really supply that many houses for those in need in those broken up communities already. So they felt that by using that as their kind of like, we are providing social housing more so than everybody should be entitled to social housing.
So like it was an act of charity which was coming out, and it was a last straw that was only reserved for a small number of people, rather than being something that could provide a solution to an unstable housing system that's been there for 100 years. It didn't just appear in the 1990s.
And especially with so many people after losing their job.
Yeah. So then when we come up to 2008, all the regenerations collapse.
Yeah.
And the mortgages fall through, so people go into arrears. So two things which were meant to be strongest in the housing system throughout the 1990s and 2000s were now the biggest liabilities or problems for people. They are meant to be positive things, that there were loads of mortgages and that there was regeneration happening. And now it looked like these were actually negative things. Regeneration could fall apart straight away because private developers pulled out. And mortgages, when there weren't actually a good times going and high employment and money floating around the economy, they were actually a big liability. There were massive debts on overpriced houses for loads of people.
But what did that mean for the developers?
Some of them lost money for a while, but then you start seeing, I suppose, after 2008, a government response, and where they intervened to save the investors and bankers and developers.
And what did they do that through?
Setting up NAMA. NAMA, the National Asset Management Agency, is the main vehicle. They're able to swoop up all of them bad debts, and swoop up all those bad debts, put them in a loan book, and say, now we'll write them off. We'll write off the debts to developers, not the people themselves. So people are still shackled to debt for their home, but anyone who invests in that, the banks who provide the loans, they were going to get off scot-free. So that was the first reflex of the government and of the establishment, was to close in on itself, protect itself, like they'd done in many ways by all of the other housing policies before that. But in a time of crisis, they were really, really pushing hard to protect themselves.
So NAMA held basically all the house stock, the land, the businesses, everything that was not seen as valuable anymore, but it was valuable. But when they resold that, who did they resell it to make the money back?
I suppose they're only starting to do that now. They've held it for a while, but it looks like vulture funds, but also then back to the same people who have been developing in the boom times.
So ordinary people don't have access to an awful lot of stock that could be valuable for a community, for a family, an individual, at a lower cost, an affordable cost.
Yep.
More so than selling it back to big companies and developers that can make profit on it, where a family just wants to have a home.
Yeah, definitely. And they had an opportunity in a certain way, a way of doing things, which was big banks lending out loads of money, and that all collapsing, the state taking it over. They could then have used that immediately to provide social housing, to provide affordable homes, to provide community resources, to provide land. Instead, while they were protecting the investors, they were cutting all of those things. So you have this massive economic collapse in 2008, you have the establishment saving its own skin and then imposing austerity on everyone else. But something seemed to start changing in 2014. There seemed to be a new plan emerging. What do you think was kind of coming out or starting to change then?
2014, didn't we see the release of the 2020 social housing policy?
Yeah.
And from that, we've seen that there wasn't really a need to build social housing, that it was going to be a new scheme called Housing Assistance Payments, HAP, where anyone that was in need of social housing was going to go into the private rented sector and basically live in private rented accommodation without any protections of what was seen in the past, with length of tenancy, rent increases, conditions, and then support and advocacy was lacking as well. Rent controls was the main thing.
So there's this old joke about Ireland never being having a gene for owning property or whatever, but there's always been people renting in Ireland. But that side, the plan from the establishment or the government always seemed to be to encourage more ownership. But even with that announcement of social housing strategy, which had no social housing in it, there was something really missing. Where are all those people meant to go? And if you're saying HAP is a housing system payment, it's a nice cover. That is private renting, but it's the state paying landlords directly. So private landlords providing and the state paying the money.
Exactly.
It's mad. It's kind of...
We already seen that with the rent allowance scheme that's still in effect, but with restrictions on it.
Yeah.
So it didn't make sense to introduce a whole new scheme when all you could do is change legislation for the schemes that are already there.
Yeah.
The HAP scheme would appear to be more attractive to landlords, but not obviously the small landlord would be more attractive to the bigger landlord.
Okay.
So if we were to look at the future of the plan, I'm sure we'll express more on it.
Yeah, because with that, paired with that, there was two big efforts around the mortgages. So if they'd kind of suspended mortgage debt and mortgage arrears in 2014, the Land and Conveyancing Act, and then which effectively made it easier to evict families, which had been a stall compared to places like Spain where they've been evicting 100,000 families. In Ireland, there had been a bit of a delay on that. So people were still in debt, still suffering, but weren't losing their homes to the same extent. But that was kicking off, so you're forcing people out of mortgages to where unknown, and at the same time they put a limit on people getting new mortgages. So there was a deposit retention limit, which in loads of ways can make sense, but again it limits the number of people who can go that direction. So no social housing, loads of less people with mortgages, and an expanded rent allowance scheme called housing system payment, which means private rental sector seemed to be the way they were pushing and what they were moving on.
You can see that also they didn't put any protections in for support around any evictions, be it from the private rental sector or the mortgage sector. So everybody was vulnerable. So the plan could be seen as this was the big solution for everybody because everyone wanted answers.
Yeah.
Everyone wanted a home, everyone wanted a roof. The fear of homelessness.
Yeah.
The fear of actually where to go, where are we going to be, the establishment of emergency accommodation becoming an industry more so than just a service provided.
So that's the flip side. If they're pushing people into private rental, which is unstable by its very nature.
And always has been unstable.
Yeah, and has been. And there's no control or no efforts by the government or anyone else to try to put some stability into it. There's a massive expansion of homelessness. And that's what we're saying at the very start. This huge increase. Well, that seemed to be by design.
Well, isn't there more profit to be made? There's more developers and businesses that can get involved in the homeless industry. So if you're in private rented, you will always be at risk of homelessness.
Yeah.
And if you're homeless and you're entering into the private rented sector, you're at risk of going back homeless again.
Yeah.
And with the eviction bill, you see many family homes being taken off them.
Yeah.
So they were then pushed obviously into sofa surfing, which is homelessness as well.
Yeah.
Or else back into the private rented sector, maybe move down the country to a different county to be able to afford a rent that was probably lower than what the mortgage rate was.
Yeah. And that homeless system has been hostels, hotels, who are all private, and then charity organisations who are non-profit but still are on a business model, are still paying large sums to CEOs, are still making, in essence, money from it. And then, in some ways, the remnants of the church is in the back through those, and they'd already ran loads of institutions before.
Also, wasn't voluntary housing part of the social housing scheme before all this kind of came in? And then we see a shift recently from the private residential tenancy board, where it used to be only for private landlords, removed the private bit, and now also includes voluntary housing.
Yeah.
So in a way, voluntary housing has now shifted into the private market more so than being a social housing provider.
So there was that big announcement then, which seemed to sum all that together from Dick Brady, who's the head of probably the most powerful council in the country, which is Dublin City Council, when he made this big announcement of this whole new housing system called public housing. And it sounds lovely again. They were talking about social mix and sustainable communities and all this great things that most people want. But when it broke down, this seemed to be the crystallising of all of that push to the private rental system.
So in other words, the council are pushing public housing, changing the name from social housing.
Yeah.
So what, to move away from the social housing stigma into public housing, but not providing social housing, providing private rental accommodation. Yeah.
That's the big thing that we keep, every time we come up and kick against it, is that there is the council itself washed their hands of what's happening because they've outsourced through HAP, they outsource all of effectively their tenants into private landlords. In homelessness, they outsource anyone who's homeless, who's meant to be going through service and supported, is being put into a private business or family-run business, or which act like detention centres. But they're washing their hands of it, saying it's this company that does it, or it's this company. So they're only managers, or they check up on companies. They don't actually run anything. So the whole social or state provision of housing and homelessness is gone. It's been wiped away.
So they're basically becoming property management.
Yep.
And people management, more so than provision of services and provision of housing. But what do you think, like?
Even what you're saying there, the idea of people management, even in itself, is kind of a good description. They're managing people, which most of the time means they're disciplining people. They're keeping people under check and watch rather than supporting or helping them. So that seems to be an important part of it. It's about making money for private businesses, but it also seems to be about the state being used to keep people in line, not to actually support them. So it's a really, really, and that's where a lot of the brutal treatment we see is at the hands of that.
You can also see as well with how they're getting rid of social housing stock. Didn't recently they do an announcement where you can buy your social house at a reduced rate or at a discount?
Yeah.
So if they sell off this stock, what would that mean for the future of social housing?
It means it's gone. It means the aim is to get rid of it. And the plan just seems to be to get rid of it. And all the pieces come together. Get the older generations who are there and quite comfortable in social housing to buy their place so they can pass on to their kids. Or they can sell it or retire on it or use it for a pension, whatever they want. But get them out. Then make sure no new people can actually come into social housing. So they'll all go into private rental through HAP. And that's massive.
All at the
shift.
same.
The most right-wing shift in housing in the history of the state. And quickly, and in only 2 years, they've started to put, and they're only starting to put into place. I think they're starting to push it through. They're starting to limit it. But
and do you think that they're going to try and sell it as kind of back to the home ownership kind of value of Irish perception of ownership within the Constitution and what we've been brought up to believe? Like, so the discount will be seen as you are now on the property market. Well, little do they realise, or anybody that's going to be purchasing the properties, that it's actually to get rid of social housing more so than to give them a way of ownership.
it seems to be mixed. It seems to be the traditional idea of ownership is being pushed, but at the same time they're limiting that through new mortgages, through the deposits on new mortgages. It seems to be like they can create a whole new market, 2 whole new markets, a massive private rental market, but it's been small, relatively small in comparison to Ireland, and a huge homeless industry for anyone who drops out of private rental. And these can be new areas for businesses in vulture funds, investment companies, letting agencies, large-scale landlords that exist in other countries but haven't existed as much here, to be able to make consistent money. And it's closer to the 1880s with big absentee landlords in rural Ireland than it is anything that we've seen since.
So with the land, who are, like, with the public housing development, so how are they going to portray this public housing new system? Who's going to be the owners of this land? How is it they're going to develop the land?
Yeah, it's crazy because like if public housing was announced last year and seemed to combine the HAP scheme, which create private rental, seemed to come together with the social housing strategy, as in they're not providing social housing. The next step, along with expanding the private rental board, bringing in vulture funds, is 3 massive sites of land in Dublin, quite valuable, and they're leasing the land for effectively free. So not even selling it, they're leasing it out. Developers get to build on it, investors get to invest. It's going to be majority private rental and expensive starter homes. And that's going to be the mix with social housing a corner of the area. And a bit of commercial thrown in the mix to keep the money going. But that's what they're constructing with those big sites of land. Private rental is the dominant part. And then expensive ownership.
So the new system from public housing that's being developed, we can say it's the 3-tier system.
Yeah.
And how do we explain what the 3-tier system actually is? The owners,
yeah,
the renters, and the homeless.
And the thing is, there's always been owners, renters, and homeless. People have been homeless. Travellers have effectively been home to a certain extent, moving around the country and then forced onto halting sites. Migrants have been put in detention centres without a home. Families who are socially stigmatised were put in Magdalene laundries and put in homes. People without parents were put in foster homes. These are all seen as effectively being homeless. You aren't seen as a stable home. There were always renters, either renting land or renting homes in Dublin or in cities. And then there were owners who were normally controlled, who were big, medium and small owners who had one home up to owning large swathes of the country. But now there seemed to be this big push with that three-tier system to concentrate the owners, make sure that there was smaller number of people owning more and more, massively expand who rents. So then they're going to be paying money to owners. And that's going to be international vulture funds, or it's going to be big scale Irish landlords, but they're going to be paying money, which could be paid forever. And they're trying to make that the new norm of you just paying your whole life rent rather than having anything else. And then at the bottom, eliminate social housing out of that equation. So then you're just left below that with a homeless system, which is normal, that there will be 10, 15, 20,000 people in the country homeless, that they'll be moved around between different homeless places, that there'll be companies who make money out of that they'll have to keep their heads down, and then after a number of years they might progress. They might be given some check-ins by charities or other organisations, but at the end of the day, they're at the bottom. They'll be made money out of them, but also there'll be this massive social stigma, and they'll be seen as the thing that can keep renters in line. You never want to be homeless. Homeless is really bad. Keep your head down. Shut up. Don't talk about what's happening. Don't talk about the instability in your own system, the mold and damp in the fact that your landlord never fixes anything or wants to evict you. You could be homeless tomorrow, so just be quiet. So it's a system that can reinforce and keep itself going, and can be really strong, and that seems to be what they want to do. And they need to strengthen the renter system to do that. They need to put more people into rental. They need to let the homeless system expand. Keep it just enough in check so that people don't kick up, which they have and they're struggling with, but at the same time make sure it's chaotic enough and punitive enough, and there's enough hatred and bad things going on in it that people are going to be fearful of and not want to be there. And the word travels through families and friends that this is a terrible system they don't want to be in. So they're using that as a stick to beat people with, and that's the 3 tiers that they're building. Do you think their plan, or if they're building this 3-tier system, is it actually going to work? Can that provide enough for people to keep it going, to keep the money going?
The privatisation of housing and the push of the rental market and homeless industry can't work and won't work. I think that what the problem is that they've pushed too much for social housing into the private rented. From the cases that we've seen, we've got young families that have never rented before in homeless services trying to access rented accommodation. They've no references. They've never had a job because they're only so young. They don't know the rules and the regulations around private renting, and they're vulnerable. They've been victims. That the needs aren't being met through the private rented sector. So I don't think that accessing private renting is going to be a lot easier than what they claim it's going to be. I think that the lack of support and advocacy around the conditions and the problems that we have within the private rented sector, there's not enough government, state funded agencies or independent bodies to help those that are accessing private rented accommodation as their home for the rest of their life, to be able to enable them, to empower them to know exactly how they should live or the way that they want to live. I think that the private rented sector is not the solution whatsoever, because there's too many gaps that are missing. I feel that it's a push into the homeless industry, and you'll always be in the homeless industry, and the fear, mental health problems with schools, the breaking up of communities, alienation from everybody. We're creating a society that we don't want our grandkids to be brought up in. We want a society where at least people know each other, they're able to talk about their problems, they're able to access the services, they're able to go to school and actually learn and educate and make their own plans for where they want to go in life. I feel that with the homeless services that are in place, with them being centralised, the breakup of the community with that when you're in the homeless services is going to have an effect, a long-term effect, not only on the person, the family, the community, but on the whole system as a whole. Because it's going to cost way much more money than actually providing houses in the long term. We can see that through the modulars that we're already plant as an alternative for emergency accommodation. Bad planning. Completely just got to do with construction and not with community needs, wants, and what needs to be built around a family unit. With the mortgages, what I do think with their plan, it's already started to work with families being evicted and homes being repossessed, is to minimise how many people actually own their homes.
Yeah.
So we'll have a tiny percentage at the top, and then most of the gut of the percentage there being private rented, and then in homeless services.
So it might be profitable for developers or investors or landlords, but for everyone else it's chaotic.
It's never going to be beneficial for the ordinary Joe Soap, for any Irish family or anyone that wants to come to live in Ireland.
Yeah.
That it's not going to be an opportunity where you're going to be able to put your roots down and have a family life, or to be able to make a commitment to the area that you want to live in.
Yeah.
So as they grow the private rented sector, and whether it be with housing assistance payment or with an affordable rent, they won't get that affordable rent unless they link rent control to income.
Yeah.
But as I can see with what's going on with the housing list, that already there's 150,000 of people on the housing list, and as you accept, or your landlord accepts this new housing assistance payment, you are removed from the housing list. So you're not seen as having a need anymore, and you're put onto a transfer list.
Yeah.
And on the transfer list, they don't have to provide you with any accommodation, especially when you do become homeless.
Yeah.
So this is going to have a knock-on effect of, in the private rental sector, if you do become homeless, from the private you just automatically go into the homeless services and you're not on a housing need list, so they don't have to provide any houses.
So the state's responsibility to provide for people is being just written out.
Yeah, exactly.
They're literally just withdrawing the policies and things that have been built up over time, which are meant to protect to a certain extent. They're just being written up or ripped up, and they're leaving people at the mercy of the private system. And into homelessness, and into the private system, and into homelessness.
Yeah.
Do you think that the fact that on the other end for work and everything, they're driving down wages at the same time, so you're going to have low wages and high rent?
You'll have low wages, high rent, so that means because the wages are going to be lower, everybody's going to be accessing housing assistance payment.
Yeah.
So what the state then will appear to be seen as, but we're providing supplementary payments to as many people who need it, that are on this low wage income. So that once again keeps a control over those that are working extra jobs. Many people are going to be paying cash and will not want to access that supplementary payment because the social stigma will be there. It will be still attached. So they'll be like, I don't want to access that payment because I would then be seen as being in a social housing system. Yeah. So they will work 3, 4 jobs, 5 jobs to keep the roof over their head.
Another tool to just keep people.
It's just another tool to keep us working more hours for less money to pay the rent and to put food on the table.
And if they're driving privatisation in housing at the same time as in work, driving down conditions of work, and then driving health and education become more expensive at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So you get that triple whack of struggling with every single bill and having less money to even pay those bills.
So basically everybody will be surviving, nobody will be living.
Apart from the very wealthy who are
controlling.
Who are owning,
everything that we are working to try and reap our rewards.
So what do you think is the alternative? Or what's the alternative and what can we do to change it?
So it would be the solution, social housing for all. Basically, they should be lifting the cap as it is. There shouldn't be a cap. Social housing should be accessible for anybody that wants it. You should have a choice. Whether you want to be in the private market, or if you can actually have a house where you pay a rent based on your income. Yeah.
So that's like, there's been this kind of stigma associated with social housing and problems associated with it. And then there's also a lot of time a lack of knowledge of what that is. So what are the kind of, why is there been a stigma, and what are the kind of basics of
Stigma
what that would,
around
would
social
look.
housing would be saying like your free house, your sense of entitlement, your sense of, oh, why should you get a free house when I have to work really hard to pay for my mortgage? People realise when they're paying for a mortgage they're still renting. That house can be taken off them. And those that are in social housing pay rent.
You're renting the state,
and they pay just as much if they have a good job. It doesn't mean just because you're in social housing you don't have a good job. You can be in a social house, have a good job, develop on with your life, get a good job, and pay just as much as a mortgage for your rent. So the whole stigma around social housing needs to be removed, and that can be removed if the cap is lifted, that your income cap is lifted, that everybody is accessible to social housing, more so than it just being restricted to those on the lower ends of the pay scale.
And social housing is housing that's taken directly out of this chaotic market. Developers won't, like, investors won't be making money, landlords won't be making money from it. All of that extra wealth that's there is going to be redistributed back out.
Back into the communities.
Yeah.
Social housing can alleviate so many problems. It can provide services for those that are vulnerable in social housing, and that can help lift the stigma as well. Because what you'll find is, unfortunately, many of the social housing estates did become run down, but that's got to do with the cutbacks.
Yeah.
The cutbacks that didn't put back into the community and help those that were vulnerable to be able to move on, to go into education, to go on to better jobs, to go on to improve their lives.
Yeah.
To be able to buy their home. They were never able to actually buy that social house back and just continue through the family.
Yeah. So if you opened up social housing to everyone in a very practical way, right now to deal with the problems that were there, for mortgage holders, what would be the advantage for them who are in debt?
It would be a big advantage for those that are in debt. I think that if we were able to write down their debt and the house that they were originally in, especially if it was a public bank, it became state owned. So there automatically it becomes a social house. So you still pay your rent, but you're never going to be kicked out of your family.
But your rent's lower, you're more security for your family, and you're going to have stability right the way through, as well as that providing back in for the rest of the country.
And you stay in your community and you can grow your roots through it.
And for all the young people and many families and people who are in private rental and are seeing rents go up and up, where it could be any rent. The landlord gets to choose.
Yeah, market rate is on how much you're willing to pay.
Yeah.
So it's not actually linked to anything that's got to do with the property price of next door or across the road. It's basically the demand.
Yep.
So there'll always be a demand in the private sector. Always, like, where we're going to be challenging each other, especially with the new 3-tier system.
We'll be competing. Yeah,
so we'll always be competing against each other. So the prices are always going to rise.
Yeah.
And if they keep on rising, it will push family units outside of the city, and the city will be redesigned.
Yeah.
So the city is going to be redesigned into a commercial business hub. It'll become really big, more so.
So expensive renters in the city centre, middle poor renters are in the middle and edges, and then any other families pushed fully out who can't afford. So keeping that strict division.
Yeah, and you can see that already by containing the families in each county, because each council works in their own way.
Yeah.
So you need to lift the restrictions that are on that as it is. So if you are on a Dublin list, you should be able to access somewhere down in Limerick. We're not the other side of the world, it's the same country.
Yeah.
So you should be able to have the same access to any kind of housing abilities or housing. Cool.
And it matches your need.
Yeah.
Where your need is as well.
Yeah.
And if you're a private renter who's paying 1,500 or is paying 600, 700, 800, 1,000 a month, you're only earning 15, 20 grand, 25 grand a year, if it was linked to your income like it is in social housing, your rent would be halved.
Yeah.
So immediately you would have the option of having far cheaper rent and actually it being more stable tenancy. And then if you just bulked out something like transfer lists and all that and had variety of housing, you'd be able to let people move around a bit in the social housing system, have a bit of flexibility, but the most important thing above all, have some security for people and have some control of their rent. And it's progressive to link it to income. You pay based on what you can pay.
I like that as well. You can look at it with the empty buildings that there is already.
Yeah.
So if we were to look at the empty buildings that are already there, how many did they say there was? 200,000 empty. Nobody's using, gone to derelict. They do create more of a problem within areas because people can get in, they can set them on fire, the whole lot. That you can see that them buildings should be all put to use. Why aren't they being used?
Those buildings and the empty land. If you take the buildings, the land, and if you take that, you could clear all the debt that's in the mortgage system and start cleaning up even when there is abuse by landlords, which are widespread in other countries, you still get penalties against landlords who are abusing and mistreating tenants. And that was a method to get those houses to be more secure, as long as tenants are put first, and people are actually given some housing security and a home that they can live in. There's many ways to go forward, but I mean challenging them. That seems to be our big battle, that we have a whole system to challenge, which is very pitched against us, very powerful.
I think that they've been playing a game with us for such a long time that it's very hard to get people to realise that we're all in the same situation as each other. That those that are on the promise, like in mortgages, they're always fearful that they'll lose their mortgage or lose their home. They have the shame and the stigma of their friends and their family that they couldn't keep it or couldn't keep the mortgage repayments. Then in the private rented, you have, well, I'm a little bit better off than those that are in social housing or in homelessness. And the attitude can, through no fault of their own, can be kind of more of a sense of entitlement for more and to grow more up in the private sector. That I pay, I have what I have because I work hard, that kind of attitude. But they did get there by working hard. There's no questions about that. But I feel that everyone needs to start realising that we're all born into the earth with nothing and that we're not given the same opportunities. It's a rat race, basically. Some people are born privileged, some people aren't. Some people are born poor, some people are born with a couple of bob and live comfortable.
Yeah.
So, but at the end of the day, it all comes down to your emotions and understanding how we can relate with each other. And I think it's got to do with fear. I think it's when you've lost everything and you've nothing to lose anymore is when you can fight back and you can try and empower others to realise that that's the only way that anything is going to change within any system or in any government. Yeah.
So it's going to be fighting back, and that's so far, and from your experience and everything you've seen, is that those with nothing stand up, kind of fight or flight.
Yeah, and then the game is played against everybody else that is affected.
Yeah.
About why are they fighting? They should be happy with what they have, or they should be accepting. They put themselves in that situation. Until you're affected, it's only when you're affected and actually end up in the same situation as somebody else is when you realise actually the supports that are not there.
Yeah.
There was no protection to stop you from falling into that trap. That's where those affected lead the way, come into any kind of action, any kind of organising or support that we would put together.
Yeah. And mortgage holders are affected, they're exploited by their bank.
Yeah.
Private renters are exploited by their landlord.
Yeah.
People in social housing are being mistreated from the council, right up to the just general stigma against their community. People in homelessness are being routinely brutalised, victimised, kicked out of places, treated terribly. All of them are being affected in one way or the other, and all of that in common. But there's divides that need to be
And
lifted.
this is where it comes down to human rights, because you can see it as it moves down the ladder or as it moves up the ladder. At the bottom, you've no rights. You've no protections in emergency accommodation and can be evicted and left on the street. So you're hanging on for any kind of right that you're possible. As in social housing, you've a little bit more rights because you have protection, because they can't just evict you from the social housing. And then as you move up into private rented, you can have an argument and you have the PRTB or the RTB there to mediate, and you have the court system to help you if you're educated enough to know your rights. And then you have the mortgage system where you would have been educated to understand to go and take out a mortgage, to have a good job, or to have a job that would be able to make it able to pay the mortgage.
Yeah.
So if you look at the different tiers of rights, they're all played off each other.
And the problem is the system is hunting so much for profit so quickly, and that keeps clashing directly with those rights. So they get pared back on each level. So like keep a difference, like a class divide between each group, but overall there's still this general pushback against everyone, and to make their conditions worse, to make them more insecure, more unaffordable, more struggling, more poverty in those situations.
And the more they do it, the more they divide.
Yeah.
The more they divide each layer. So once the layers are all divided, it's going to be harder to bring unity among them. And that's where it's very important that everyone can see and understand that housing is a right.
Yeah.
More so than a commodity.
Yeah. And if the aim of social housing, the aim of housing in general, is to say it's a right, it's not a commodity, it should be based on your need. In every hostel you should have protection and rights. In every private rental place you should have protection and rights. And these are on the short term in every other type of housing. But in the long term we can have a whole system built where everyone has protection and everyone has some security and everyone has a level of fairness in their housing.
But how do you fight that? How do you build to fight against a system that's built against you?
The only thing that seems to be is together. That there's only some groups, and we've seen in homelessness, that when you're down on your luck and you've got nothing left and you're most affected, you fight, but you also rely on other people to support you. You call out your family and your community. You call out the people around you that you think are going to stand with you, and it's only those numbers standing together that have a chance of kicking up against these rich and powerful people. So it's only with that type of collective action, and that seems to be strongest still, even though there's very little there seems to be strongest still with everyone who's at the bottom, and they're the ones who can teach the lesson to everyone else that you can stand together and you can fight.
True support.
Yeah.
Support each other. Be there for each other. Listen to each other. Encourage, go places with each other. Information's always given over wrongly. You don't take it in when you're affected. The more we stand together and be seen going in together, the harder it's going to be to give us ways out.
Yeah. Nothing should be on its own. No one should be isolated. And also there's no individual who's going to solve it.
And there is help out there.
Yeah.
It's not like as if people aren't aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
How do we access the help? That's what people would be, because they're so alone in their situations. How do they access the help? How do you rebuild in your community for help around your housing issue?
So it started by groups like North Dublin Bay starting off in one community and starting to pull together friends, family in their community to support each other, and then take actions when they need to, have support groups for each other, deal with all the day-to-day problems that they face with each other.
And speak out.
And then link with other areas and keep building that link, community by community. Because we're rebuilding stuff that existed in the 70s, existed in the 60s, existed in the 30s, which helped to create a revolution in 1916 and 1918. That was all killed the last 30 years.
And it can happen again.
And we can rebuild it. We're not doing something that's crazy or new. It's something that has existed in every generation, and it's needed again in this generation to fight.
Self-empower.
This is to all the residents in St. Catherine's on the Parnell Road. I'm here to support you. My daughter Catherine, who lives in apartment 8, was assaulted in your premises where you live. When she reported it to Garda Síochána, she was evicted from the building. They turned off her gas, our ESB. You have no rights. He's still living there with his children. No gas, no ESB. I don't want to stay here all night and keep you people awake while you have children in school in the morning. But I will be back tomorrow and every day if I have to die in the cold here. So this woman, Elizabeth Gallagher, who runs this building, you people have no rights. You don't have to go to that office and ask for gas, ESB, second-class citizens to feel insulted.
We're being made homeless again on election day. But we're not just standing here for the homeless, we're standing here for every man, woman and child for a right to have a place they call home. At the moment, yet there's 1,616 children that call B&Bs, hostels and hotels home. We have a few demands, and Ashley's going to tell us our demands.
Our demands are quite simple. When you're registered homeless, your rights are stripped away. We want proper rights. We don't want to be told where to go, what to do and when to do it anymore. As paying tenants in emergency accommodation, we want rights as tenants. And finally, we want the right to homes for our children. Thank you.